The DA held on for victory, the ANC continued its deterioration, and both the Patriotic Alliance and ActionSA left their mark in this latest round of by-elections. So we've just had the second round of by-elections in South Africa take place for the year, and it was quite a thrilling round of by-elections, to be fair, with some very close contests. There were two in the Western Cape and one in Gauteng. But what's really important for us to note is that at the time of recording this video, we are awaiting a crucial announcement from DA leader John Steenhuisen to be delivered a little later in the morning. Now, there is a lot of speculation that he's going to announce his decision not to seek re-election as the DA leader, and he has been facing quite a lot of backlash in recent days, particularly around his handling of the foot and mouth disease as Minister of Agriculture. Now, I would like to issue a disclaimer about the results, and that is the fact that the DA support levels may have been affected by this public outrage. And so ultimately, depending on how Steenhuisen approaches the foot and mouth disease going forward and whether or not he steps down, could have an impact on where the DA support goes in the future, whether it does manage to recover or whether it slumps. And so it is just something important to note about this round. But before we get into it, if I could please just remind you to subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. It's completely free to do, and all you've got to do is click the subscribe button below the video. And if you would like to support the channel and enjoy some additional benefits, become a Power Club member by clicking the join button below. Now let's get into it. So the first by-election we're going to take a look at is Ward 2 in Mogale City. So here the ANC was able to hold on to retain the ward with 887 votes, or 57.19%. But what's really important for us to understand about this by-election is that this is actually a very poor result for the ANC, given their historical performances here. ActionSA were actually the standout performers. They came second with 447 votes, or 28.82%, followed by the DA with just 109 votes, and then the MK party, who had 103 votes. Taking a look at the past election data, and one thing becomes abundantly clear. So the EFF was a consistent performer in this ward, and they decided not to contest these by-elections, and so that did affect the result. But what's really interesting, if we take a look at the graph over here, is that the EFF has consistently been the party in second place. So we see that back in 2016, they got 293 votes, or 10.9%. They then went up to 358 votes, or 11.9% in 2019, before coming back down to 283, or 16% in 2021. Obviously, the percentage went up because of the lower voter turnout overall. And then in 2024, they got 266 votes, or 11.3%. And this was the year when they went from second place down to third because of the emergence of the MK party. You see, if we look at the MK party, they got 276 votes, or 11.8% in 2024. And in this election, they went down to 103 votes, or 6.64%. And this is quite a devastating result for them, because after all, as explained, the EFF decided not to contest, and so they would have hoped surely that certain EFF votes may have gone to them. But as we can see, they declined quite significantly. Furthermore, we see how the ANC tanked, and we'll get into that in a little bit later, but ultimately, the MK weren't able to convince their voters to come to them either, and instead it was ActionSA who really took the cake. So if we look at the DA, they only got 109 votes this time around, and this is a ward where they've never really been able to produce a standout performance. So in 2016, they got 119 votes, or 4.4%. This went up to 150 votes in 2019, or 5.1%. And then in 2021, they got 108 votes, or 6.1%. 2024, it was 154 votes, or 6.6%. And then in the 2026 by-election, they fell down to 109 votes, but they still came out with 7.03%, because, again, there was a lower turnout among other parties. And so The DA struggled quite heavily in this ward, but they will be happy that they did manage to stabilize their support. But the real winners here were ActionSA. You see, in 2024, that was the first time they ever contested this ward, and they only got 52 votes, or 2.2%. And this surged all the way up to 447 votes, or 28.82%. And so they'll be ecstatic, having skyrocketed into second place. The ANC, however, will be devastated. You see, they may have won the ward, but if we take a look at their past performances, they've really fallen off. So in 2016, they had 2,235 votes. They then actually went up a little bit in 2019 to 2,330. And then in 2021, their support really collapsed. They fell all the way down to 1,287. Now, in 2024, they recovered slightly to 1,425 before collapsing yet again to just 887 votes, which is their lowest ever vote tally, and then 57.19% is their lowest percentage of the vote in this ward. And so ultimately what we've learned from this is that ActionSA have managed to make inroads unlike any other party ever before. It seems that they've been able to attract former ANC voters and perhaps even former EFF and MK voters to their side, while the DA, in comparison, have made absolutely no impact and even reversed. So ultimately, it will be a very worrying result for the MK party and the ANC, a pretty indifferent result for the DA, but the ActionSA will be ecstatic. Our second by-election of the day was in Cederberg, Ward 4. So here the DA was able to just edge out the PA in order to retain their seat. They got 845 votes, or 35%, whereas the PA came up just slightly short with 816 votes, or 33.83%. The ANC were able to get 523 votes, or 21.68%, followed by the National Coloured Congress at 167 votes, or 6.92%. What we immediately notice about this ward when we look at its past data, especially at the graph on the right, is that there's been quite a lot of erratic performances from pretty much every political party. Now, just to point out, in 2021, we see how all the parties really seemed to struggle here, and that is because there was a new local party made up of Cederberg residents that entered the political scene, and so they took a lot of support away from the DA. So that explains the DA's dip in this specific ward. But if we look at the DA's result, back in 2016, they were at their strongest with 1,361 votes, or 67.4%. And then in 2019, they dropped all the way down to 994, or 46.1%. In 2021, as I explained, they lost a lot of votes to the local party, so they only had 466 votes, or 17.5%. And so they performed worse than both the PA and the ANC. And then in 2024, without that local party, the DA bounced back. They ended up being the most popular party in the ward with 999 votes, or 43.3%. And then, of course, in this by-election, they came away with the win, but they will be quite worried because they did lose quite a lot of votes in the process, going down from 43% to 35%. As for the PA, they'll be pretty happy with this result, although a little bit disappointed because they couldn't come away with the win. They got 548 votes over here in 2021, or 20.6%. This rose to 648 votes, or 28.1% in 2024. And then in this by-election, they got their best ever result of 816 votes, or 33.83%. And so you can see how they are hot on the DA's heels. We see it in our graph as well as in the numbers, and it really does seem as if these trends continue, the PA will eventually win this seat off of the DA. The ANC had a pretty interesting rise in this ward because in 2016, they only had 527 votes, or 26.1%, but they actually rose all the way up to 897 votes in 2019, which is 41.6%. In 2021, they slipped down to 835 votes, or 31.4%. And then they fell even further to 531 votes in 2024, which is 23%, and then down to 2026's level of 523 votes, or 21.68%. Now, you'll remember how I mentioned that the PA will be very disappointed that they didn't defeat the DA. And a very big part of the reason why is because of the emergence of the National Coloured Congress. So back in the 2024 provincial election, they only got 3 votes over here, or 0.1% of the vote. But now in 2026, they managed to come away with 167 votes, or 6.92%. And so the PA will feel quite hard done by, because they and the NCC are fighting for pretty much the same voter bloc. And so had the NCC not been there, one could imagine how the PA could have probably won the ward, because after all, they were a little bit less than 30 votes short of the DA's tally, and the NCC got 167 votes. So it certainly would have made a difference. So the final ward that we have to discuss here is Ward 4 in Langeberg. So this was actually quite an interesting situation, because if we look at the numbers here, we notice that if we combine all of the votes, they actually outnumber quite excessively the total tally of votes in regular elections. So if we look at the general tally as well as the municipal tally, it's actually less than what they got in this by-election, which is quite strange, because by-elections normally have a much lower turnout than national and municipal elections. And there could be quite a few reasons why, but getting into the results themselves, the DA managed to emerge victorious with 975 votes in this ward, or 40.47% of the vote. This actually saw them take the ward off of the ANC, so they'll be pretty thrilled about this result. The ANC had only 881 votes, or 36.57%, and then the PA came up third with 546 votes, or 22.67%. Looking at the past data, it really seems as if the DA came out of nowhere. You see, in 2016, they had 300 votes over here, or 15.5%. In 2019, it rose to 604 votes, or 32.2%. In 2021, they slipped back down to 456 votes, or 31.7%. Then in 2024, they rose to 466 votes, or 28.9%. And then finally, in 2026, we saw them actually win the award for the first time, getting 975 votes, or 40.47%. As for the ANC, it's another devastating result for them. In 2016, they got 971 votes, or 50.2%. 2019 was a good year for them. They got 1,067 votes, or 57%. But then this came crashing down in 2021. They only got 526 votes, or 36.5%. In the 2024 provincial election, they slipped down to 521 votes, or 32.3%. But then, curiously, they rose all the way up to 881 votes, or 36.57% in the 2026 by-election. As for the PA, this result closely mirrors their other results in the Western Cape throughout the past few months, which is one of gradual or even accelerated rises in support. So in 2021, their first time ever contesting here, they only got 25 votes, or 1.7%. This surged up to 494 votes in 2024, or 30.6%. And in this by-election, they managed to improve further, going up to 546 votes, which saw them go back down to 22.67%. But again, that is because of the higher turnout amongst DA and ANC supporters. Now, as I mentioned, it's quite a strange ward to analyze, because all of a sudden in this by-election, we see a much higher voter turnout than in any other election before. And so what one can deduce from this is that the DA as well as the ANC did a very good job at rallying those sorts of disenfranchised voters who perhaps sat out of the previous election and getting them to the polls. Because in this specific ward, last time around, there was only a voter turnout of roughly 44%. So it's a very low turnout ward historically. And so the DA will be thrilled with this result. They'll be very glad to see that even with all of the controversy surrounding the party as of late, they were able to win this ward. And then, of course, while the PA are hot on their heels in Cederberg, they did manage to retain the seat, and they'll be very happy with that. And so overall, a pretty decent day for the DA, despite the problems that they're facing. Of course, their support has been threatened in certain areas, but they were at least able to retain a seat in the Western Cape and even won one off of the ANC. Meanwhile, the PA have continued to surge, showing very strong growth in the Western Cape, whereas ActionSA will be thrilled because they are continuing to make inroads in Gauteng, specifically in township areas and the urban periphery. Meanwhile, the ANC, apart from Langeberg, just seem to be on a consistent decline, losing support pretty much anywhere they go. And so, apart from that one specific result, they will be very worried about where the party is headed. And this certainly does make for a very interesting matchup ahead of the upcoming municipal elections later this year. Thank you very much for tuning into the video. If you found it enjoyable, please remember to subscribe to the channel for more content. Until next time, I'm Matthew Cohen, and this is the Power Pod.